I have suffered from wanderlust ever since I was a little boy. I often begged my parents to take me to new and beautiful places. The excitement of seeing golden beaches with their crisp blue water crashing against the land and snow-capped peaks sleeping on top of the granite mountains was truly intoxicating. As the years passed, the urge to see the world became a driving force of who I'd become. When I turned 18, I packed my swag and I left to travel the world. First it was the Americas. I roamed North America, Central America, and finally South America. The culture, history, food, and people all pushed me to learn as much as I could in my travels. I spent months traveling throughout the region, staying in hostels or camping under the stars. I wanted to see it all. But eventually it came time for me to pack my swag and head off to Asia. And my first stop was India. I'd always been drawn to India, the pictures that I'd seen, the vibrant festivals, and the beauty of the people. How couldn't I be drawn to the subcontinent? The plane touched down in Delhi. It was a culture shock. I'd never seen so many people in my life. I squeezed onto the street and somehow I managed to reach my hostel. I spent a few weeks in Delhi, seeing the local temples and making some wonderful friends who showed me the true traditional way of living like an Indian. Once again, it was time to leave, and I decided that I'd make my way north and travel to Nepal, but I had to take a few detours first. I found myself in the majestic city of Patna, on the southern bank of the Ganges River, the life-giving river of India. It was a magical city, with brightly coloured Hindu temples and British architecture. How could someone bitten by the travel bug not fall in love with Patna? Every day I'd spend hours wandering the streets, intermingling with the crowds, visiting temples, tasting various street foods, and just losing myself in the Indian culture. On one fateful day, I just finished visiting a temple, and the day had gotten away from me. The sun was setting in the distance, and I thought it'd be nice to stop at a small street vendor, buy some food, and then retire to my hostel for the night. I thought it would be nice to stop at a small street stall, buy some food, and then retire to my hostel for the night. It was a wonderful time of evening. The smell of the spices filled the air, the evening was still warm, and I was looking forward to rest. I was passing a small house. Its worn yellow paint was flaking off the walls, broken slivers of glass hung from their frames, and the door was weathered and splintered. The house looked like it had been a scene of violence. From inside the house came a desperate wail. It was filled with so much grief and sorrow. It broke my heart. Several people had gathered outside the house. They seemed to be agitated. Their hands were striking out at the sky, curled into fists as they directed their fury towards the heavens. I broke one of my golden rules, which was not to interact with angry crowds. But the scream, it called to me. I had to go and investigate. So I cautiously approached. A man seemed to be a brunt of the crowd's righteous fury. His face looked like it had aged drastically. Long lines covered his forehead, showing a life of hard labour. His hairs were hidden underneath a white turban. It looked like it was made from a fine silk, and it was adorned with strings of white beads that connected the front along the side. A long black beard flowed gracefully down onto his white dhoti and swayed as he talked to the crowd. His eyes haunted me. They looked like they'd seen so much sorrow and loss. It almost seemed like he'd lost everything, and he just didn't know what to do anymore. The closer I inched towards the group, I could hear the angry tones from the people and the older man. He was speaking in Hindi. His words flowed like a torrent of water, attempting to keep the rocks from flowing along a riverbed. I couldn't understand him, even though I'd picked up a few words here and there. I couldn't keep up with him. He was talking way too fast for me to understand. But the waves of grief and anger were seeping off him. It gave him a very disturbed aura. His eyes darted from person to person in turn, and his finger jabbed at the air as he pointed wildly at the crowd. Finally, his old, weathered finger reached me. The words stopped, and there was silence. Some members of the crowd turned to look at me, and I could feel their puzzled gaze lingering on me. The old man's lips tightened. Each muscle slowly pulled the corners into a snarl. A deep growl replaced the silence as his hand reached towards a slender silver blade that was hanging from his belt. When his fingers touched the finely decorated handle, he lunged towards me. He moved like a wild cat. His delicate frame flew through the air with such grace and power. I just managed to sidestep his lunge. I didn't see the knife come out of the sheath, but I heard the knife slice the air with a high-pitched cry. Stumbling backwards, I almost lost my footing. I knew if I fell, that would be the end of me. And this man was seething with pure rage, and it was directed directly at me. A million hands reached out for the man, encircling him, pulling him back into the fleshy prison of the crowd in an attempt to subdue him. They piled onto him, forcing him to the ground. The old man struggled to free himself, but eventually realized his futility. He started screaming in my direction. I didn't understand Hindi, but I knew when someone was saying something terrible. "Sir, you had better leave. His daughter had just passed away," a feminine voice whispered in my ear. Turning towards the voice, there was no one there. It was about now I decided it was time to take my leave. Clearly this man was upset, and I didn't want to be killed when he got free. With haste, I fled from the area. I was only a few blocks away, and that familiar voice whispered in my ear again. "Are you alright? Please don't be upset with him. He is in grief, and you're a stranger, so he lashed out at you." Her voice sounded so sweet, and she had a very strong English accent. Turning around, I finally had a face to match the voice that had saved me from the man. A younger woman was standing there in front of me. She had to be in her late teens or early 20s. Her long black hair was wavy. It reminded me of the rolling sand dunes back home. Her eyes were a deep brown and looked like they had a wisdom beyond her young years. She wore a white sari, which was pinned with a small golden brooch in the shape of a water lily. "It's alright. What happened to his daughter?" I asked, the need now burned in my chest. She stood there momentarily, and I could see that she was unsure whether to tell me. Her eyes looked into the distance, almost like she was remembering something horrible, and finally, she spoke. "My sister was murdered. She was pregnant," she stammered. I stood there frozen. I hadn't expected to hear anything so terrible. I didn't know what to say or do. That was horrible. It's no wonder that the man is so full of anger and grief. I felt my heart breaking. "We buried her a few days ago, and the townspeople were worried that she might come back." Her voice trailed off into the distance as her mind was lost in thoughts. I wanted to ask her what she meant by "come back," but I remained silent and listened. "I'm sorry to burden you with this, but can I ask a favor? I want to visit my sister's grave, and I'm scared of the villagers. They might try and hurt me. Can you come with me?" I could hear the sadness as she asked me. How could I say no? With a smile, I nodded yes, and I told her to lead the way. Following behind her, she led me through the numerous tiny streets, and we squeezed past children playing who were still outside playing. I felt like I was lost. We twisted and turned so many times I'd lost my bearings. We reached the cemetery. Large grey stone walls stretched around the grounds. 2 large iron-wrought gates stood guard over the citizens of this place. The metal felt cold under my fingers as I pushed them open with a little bit of effort. A mixture of granite tombstones and crosses and homes of the dead were littered throughout the grounds. Even though it was dark, the green grass could be seen. The grounds were immaculate. Weaving in and out of the plots, we finally stopped before a grave. The soil looked like it had been freshly disturbed. Large clumps were scattered around the grave. It was not neat like the rest of the graveyard. The flowers that had been placed at the headstone had been scattered all over the grounds. The bright red, yellow petals were ripped from the plants. The girl took 2 steps forward and bowed her head towards the grave. Long strands of her hair fell forward, cascading over her shoulders. She raised her hands and buried her face deep, and she let out a whimper. Her body started to shake and shudder as she began to cry. I stood there reflecting on the day's events, not knowing what the right thing was to do or what to say. Lowering my head, I decided I needed to show some respect for the recently departed. A slight breeze was rustling through the grass, and the hemline of her sari danced around as it embraced the wind. Staring at the fluttering sari, something seemed off. I couldn't figure out what was wrong for a moment. Indeed, what I saw couldn't be true. My eyes had to be playing tricks on me. This couldn't be possible. Her feet were facing towards me. How could this be? What was wrong with her feet? What are you? I asked. My voice was shaky. A slow cackle started to fill the night air. The tiny hairs on the back of my neck panicked and stood up. She didn't move a muscle. She just kept laughing. They did this to me. They killed me. My parents couldn't stand I was pregnant with a foreigner's baby. They killed me, she screamed. The realization hit me. Every fibre of my body understood why the old man attacked me. He fought. I was the one who got his daughter pregnant. The shame of a foreign baby was too much for him. I will kill them all, but I'm weak. Will you help me? I need to punish them. Madness crept out of every syllable as she spoke. Slowly, she turned. I was frozen in place. My body wouldn't respond to me. That beautiful girl that I'd met before, she was gone. Something else stood in her place. Her lips were no longer small and petite. They were now enlarged and swollen, and deep cracks ran along the entire length of her lips. A black tongue flicked out of her mouth. It lingered in the night air as she spoke to me. Long, curved fangs hung low out of her mouth, and thick streams of saliva dripped off their sharp points. Her long, smooth black hair started to change before me. It became dry, scruffy, and seemed to pulse with life. Clawed fingers raised into the air, sharp nails escaped each finger as they looked like they could rend the flesh from my bones. Her belly, no longer slim, now looked distended and round. Run, I screamed to myself, but my feet wouldn't respond. It felt like something was holding them tightly in place. Panicking, I looked down at my feet, and long strands of dark, black, dry hair wrapped around my ankles, binding me to the ground. The hair started to writhe against my bare skin. It felt like a slug wriggling in the dirt. It was seeking something. The longer the hair was attached to my body, the weaker I was becoming. It was then I realized she was sucking the life out of me. That black tongue was licking her lips, and her eyes stared at me with a hunger. My hands started to change before my eyes. The soft, smooth skin became rougher, and fine lines and spots began to appear. They were turning into an old man. The beast stopped licking her lips, snapping her head to the side in a jerky motion. Her black eyes widened in horror as a voice started to speak. I turned weakly in the direction of where this creature was looking. The man who attacked me earlier was standing there. He was chanting something in Hindi, and each time he paused, he reached into a brown water skin and threw a handful of red liquid towards the beast. She started screaming. Each time the liquid hit her, a wound would open up on her body. Her cries of agony became louder and louder. Darkness began to form on the edge of my sight, and it was slowly filling my vision. I knew I couldn't hold on much longer. My legs buckled under me, and the green grass rushed up to meet me. And so did the darkness. I woke a few days later in the hospital. The hard bed was uncomfortable and my body ached from top to bottom. I felt like I wasn't alone. I managed to turn my head slightly. I saw a man sitting in a chair beside my bed. It was the old man who'd saved me. He'd been watching over me while I was unconscious. Finally, he spoke. "You are lucky to be alive." That was a Churel, a creature that hunts men, stealing their life force so she can stay alive. And now she is finished with you. She will be hunting me. His voice was full of sadness. She has already killed her brother and her uncle. We shouldn't have treated it that way. She came with happiness, and we stole that joy. Now, we will pay the price. My body felt weak. I wanted to ask him questions, but I could barely move. Each movement was a struggle. What had she done to me? "You must get used to your new body, young man." He rose and turned and walked out of the room, lying there in silence. What did he mean, get used to my new body? A wave of depression came over me. When the nurse came, I asked her for a mirror. I didn't recognize the man looking back at me. He had to be at least in his 60s. Long, snow-white wispy hair fell over his lined face, and his eyes, they looked like mine, but they were old. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's lullaby. If you like my content, please like, comment, and subscribe. And remember, dear viewer, keep watching for what's in the dark.